Hey everyone, so today's video is going to be my eyeshadow palette collection video for 2021. I always like to do an updated version of this video at the beginning of every year just to give you guys a look at my current collection. Now just a quick disclaimer, my eyeshadow palette collection is way too big. It's more eyeshadow palettes than any one person will ever need. Part of what I do here on YouTube is review makeup, so I have accumulated quite a few palettes over the years and I just wanted to make note of that. But I do love trying new palettes and formulas, so I thought it would be fun to give you guys a look at my current collection. Okay, let's start with a few ColourPop palettes. The first one is the At Forest Sight Raw Beauty Christie palette. This one is a super intense, rich palette. There are a lot of gorgeous, colorful tones, and a little bit goes a super long way. This is definitely one of their more like bold, intense palettes, so if that's what you're typically looking for, you will definitely get a lot of use out of this one. Now, on the other hand, if you like something very light, like almost barely there eyeshadow, then you might enjoy the Wild Nothing palette. This is definitely one of their lighter, more neutral eyeshadow palettes, and you can't really get too smoky, too intense with this palette. You're definitely going to get like a light sheer wash of color. I just got this one in the mail, so I haven't even tested it out yet. It is the Menage a Moi palette, and this was part of their holiday collection. If you like pink toned palettes, you might enjoy this one. It does have a couple of different textures going on. There are some pressed glitters, some metallics, some matte shadows. ColourPop does do quite a few pink toned palettes, so I'll give you guys a look at some of my other favorites, but I'll let you know how this one is once I get a chance to try it out. They did release a Sailor Moon palette, which I think was limited edition. This one has some pretty lighter tones in it and then a couple of colorful shades as well. I do like using this one during the spring and summer because it's a nice way to add a fun pop of color. And then I also love wearing the neutrals if I just want a quick and simple look. Here's another pink toned palette. This one has some purples as well. This one is the Bye Bye Birdie palette. And again, there are a couple of different textures going on. This one has some brighter tones, especially those purples right in the center. So if you want to do something a little bit more colorful and vibrant, this one might be a great option. Again, this one does have some pressed glitters in it. So if you don't like pressed glitters, I would skip over it. The Whatever palette is such a fun option if you love like warm neutrals and some fun bronzy shades. There are also some berry tones. I personally love using this one during the fall season, but you could really use it any time of the year, and I think it performs really, really well. They came out with the All That palette last year around Valentine's Day, and it's still one of my favorite ColourPop palettes. When you look at it, it might not look like anything special, but the shades look amazing on the eyes, and I love that you can incorporate that sparkly black in the corner because it just amps the look up so much. So I really like this one. It's a great option if you like pinks and you also like some of those red toned pinks as well. The Good Sport palette is an older one. I don't even think it's available anymore, but I think that this is one of their most unique palettes. They've been doing a lot of neutral palettes lately, and this one is maybe from like 2 years ago, and I thought it was such a fun color story. It's just very bold, and there are a few neutrals, but you get a good mix of colors. This is a little bit of an older one as well. It is the Dream Street palette. It was a Kathleen Lights collaboration, and I think that this is one of their best palettes in terms of quality. The shadows are extra blendable, really intense and vibrant, so you can do a neutral look, but you can pull in some of the pops of color for something a little bit more intense. Two more neutral palettes. The Double Entendre palette, again, is a very light palette. So if you go for more natural eyeshadow looks and you don't like anything too intense, this one might be a great option for you. They might have discontinued this one. I'm going to try to link all of the palettes that are still available in the description box below. So if it is available, I will link it. They did discontinue I Think I Love You. This was one of my favorite palettes, and I'm sad they got rid of it because I think that this one has just like the perfect balance of textures. So you do get 4 matte shadows that are perfect for any look and then a bunch of shimmers. Mine is very messy because I still reach for this one all the time. It's a nice option if I'm looking to complete any look and I'm missing staple shadows within the palette that I'm using. Give It To Me Straight was one of my favorite palettes when they first started doing palettes because, again, you get some really nice berries, some coppers. It's like a nice spin on a neutral palette. It's a little bit more colorful and warm-toned and bold, but again, you can still kind of create like your staple neutral look if that's something that you want to do. Okay, so I'll come back to ColourPop in a few minutes, but I wanted to share a couple of others. This one is the Persona Identity palette. They have updated the packaging, and now I think it actually comes in plastic packaging, but I really like the quality of this palette. I am hoping the brand will release another palette in 2021 because it's one of the best formulas that I've tried. It's just very blendable, very easy to work with, and the metallic shadows are very, very smooth. This one is by the brand Ace Beaute. I think I'm saying that right. I looked it up on their website because I was pronouncing it wrong, and hopefully I said it right in this video, but this is a gorgeous palette that I got in a BoxyCharm. It's very intense, very vibrant. There are some gorgeous orangey tones and some pink tones as well, and if you like really rich, intense shadows, you might enjoy this brand. On the other hand, the Catrice Self-Made Bay palette is one of the worst palettes that I've tried recently. I have it in my collection because I just did my 2020 palette ranking, and this actually ranked last. The shadows are not pigmented at all. They're pretty powdery, they're hard to build up, and then even once you build them up, they don't last on the eyes. So I don't recommend this. I definitely need to declutter this. Another ColourPop palette, this one is the Misunderstood palette. This one is so underrated. It is so good. If you like accent palettes, you're going to enjoy this one so much. The metallic shadows in here are so intense and bold and vibrant, and I just love reaching for this one, especially during the fall and the winter, and I recommend it all the time because I do feel like it's one of their most underrated options. This one is pretty old. It's the ColourPop Golden State of Mind. Do you guys remember when ColourPop did that one collab with Sephora? I think it might have been like a test run, and then ColourPop wasn't in Sephora stores after that, but they did have that one collection available on their website, and this palette was actually part of that. I do have a couple of Natasha Denona palettes. So this one is my favorite. The bronze palette is just so beautiful and warm, and every single time I use it, I love how my eyeshadow turns out. If I don't know what palette to use, I will always reach for this one because it never lets me down. It always looks amazing on the eyes, and it's just one of my all-time favorite palettes. The Glam palette is kind of like the bronze palette, but the cooler toned version. So if you like cooler toned eyeshadows and you like silvers and grays and browns, then you'll really enjoy this one. I love this one because I don't have a lot of staple cooler toned eyeshadow palettes. So this one is great because the formula is really, really nice. And when I do want a good cooler toned look, whether it's more natural or smoky, this one is perfect. The Love palette is such a good option if you like pinks and purples. This was their Valentine's Day release last year, and I love that so many brands did Valentine's Day palettes last year because I love pink and purple themes. So I am hoping that we will see even more of those in 2021. But this one is a great option because there are a lot of bold eyeshadows, and if you love colorful looks, this is a really fun option. My least favorite out of the four is probably the Sunrise palette. This was actually the first palette out of the four that I did try, and there are some really good shadows in here. I love the fact that it is a little bit more bold and intense, but a few of the shadows just don't perform as well as other Natasha Denona eyeshadows, and for the price tag, I feel like it should be pretty consistent overall, but I do think the color story is really nice, and the majority of them do work well, but there are a few that are a little bit off. I do have a few e.l.f. eyeshadow palettes. So other than the bite-sized palettes, I would say the Retro Paradise palette is my favorite. This was a summer release, and you get some really pretty warm tones and pastels. And typically when it comes to like a mixed warm tone and cool toned palette, I'm not always the biggest fan of color stories like this, but this one works. All of the shadows look amazing on the eyes, and I've just been really impressed by this one, since I got it and added it to my collection. This one is a little bit older. It is the Opposites Attract palette. After trying Retro Paradise, I don't think Opposites Attract is as good as I used to think it was. I think they've definitely improved the formula. These are a little bit thinner, so I feel like you have to build them up a little bit. They're a little bit powdery, but when it comes down to it, they do blend well. It's just that e.l.f. has improved their formula a lot since they came out with this one. Same with the New Classics palette. It's a good palette and I do enjoy it. I will reach for it on occasion. I just think they've really upped the quality with their newer palettes and their newer releases in 2020. So I'm excited to see what they do in 2021 because I think that they could create some really nice palettes. But I do love the color story. I think that this one is a nice option if you don't want to spend a lot of money on a neutral palette. I do have some Dose of Colors eyeshadow palettes. These are all 5-pan palettes. They all come with matte shadows. They have updated the packaging, and I don't know if they have these exact palettes still available. If they do, I think everything is the same other than the outer packaging, but these are very, very blendable. They're also very, very powdery. So if you don't like powdery eyeshadows, I would skip over these. But if you're looking for just good blendability, these are a nice option if you do like more of a monochromatic color story. They're easy to work with, and if you're someone who doesn't want a ton of options within their palettes, then you might really enjoy these. These next two palettes are from Too Faced. They were part of their Tutti Frutti collection. I don't know if that collection is still available. I know that I saw it at TJ Maxx last year, like back in the spring, so you might be able to find it for a discounted price if they are available. These are just very small, simple palettes. They have a couple of different textures. They're definitely not the best palettes that I've tried, but I've kept them in my collection because they do work well, and I do enjoy the color stories when I don't want a ton of options, but I either want a berry look or more of a neutral look. Sometimes I'll reach for these. I really love the Urban Decay Stoned Vibes palette. They released this one in 2020, and I know that this one gets a lot of mixed reviews, but I love a good, unique shimmer, and the shimmers in this palette look really pretty on the eyes. They give your eyes almost like a wet-looking effect, so I love layering them on top of other shadows. The matte and satin shadows in here aren't really anything super impressive, but the shimmers right in the middle are so pretty, and I just think the packaging on this palette is really gorgeous as well. Okay, I have a lot of ColourPop palettes to share with you guys. If you are not interested in ColourPop, you might want to skip ahead a few minutes because these are all of my ColourPop 9-pan palettes. So the first one is the Going Coconuts palette, which is one of my staples. It's just a very simple, neutral palette, but I find that I reach for this one a lot to go alongside of a lot of the other more colorful ColourPop palettes that I have. This one is the Miss Bliss palette. This one was part of a collection. They did 3 different palettes, but I thought that this one was the prettiest because there were pinks and oranges, and I love using this one during the spring and summer because it helps you to create a colorful eyeshadow look without being too bold and too intense. It's a little bit more toned down. Baby Got Peach is a great option if you like peach toned eyeshadow, and I like this one again because it's not too intense and too vibrant. The shimmers are just nice and simple. There is one pressed glitter in here, but the matte shadows are really blendable and smooth. The Ooh La La palette was one of the first 9-pan palettes they did, and I think it's a fun option if you like pinks. I don't wear this one as much as I wear some of the other pink palettes I mentioned earlier, but this one is a little bit more vibrant and bold. If you like red eyeshadows, Main Squeeze is fun. I feel like red eyeshadow is the one color that kind of intimidates me, but this palette makes it a little bit more approachable because you can just go in with any of these shadows and they all blend really nicely together. Orange You Glad, again, I mean, this is kind of self-explanatory. This one is a very orange palette, and orange isn't a shade that I wear a whole lot, but again, when I do want oranges, this is a great option. ColourPop did a full monochromatic series, so they have a different palette for every color of the rainbow. I never thought I liked yellow eyeshadow until I tried this palette, and I actually think it's a lot of fun. This palette makes it very approachable because the yellows in here are a little bit more toned down. They're not over the top, so I do enjoy using this one. And then the Mint to Be palette is a really fun option if you like mint eyeshadow. Now, it is a pastel palette, so there's not necessarily a ton of variation within this one palette, so I do tend to get the same look over and over, but the quality is definitely good. If you're looking for a green palette but you want more variety, then the Just My Luck palette might be a better option for you. Again, some of the shadows in here look a little bit similar, but I think the metallics in here can help you switch up the look quite a bit. The Blue Moon palette is one of my favorite colorful palettes that they've done because the quality is really good, and I do feel like there's a good variety of blue shadow in here, so you can do something a little bit lighter or something a little bit more bold and intense. Lilac You a Lot is more of a pastel purple palette. There are 2 brighter shades which are nice to pull in if you want to switch it up, but overall you get a little bit of a softer look. The It's My Pleasure palette is still like one of my top 5 ColourPop palettes after all this time, and I just think the shades in here are so unique. There are a couple of duochromes, and the metallics are so intense and pretty on the eyes, and I like that it's like a pink and purple palette because overall you get more variety than you do with a couple of the other monochromatic palettes. This is my newest ColourPop palette, Wine and Only, and I've had so much fun using this. I cannot stop wearing it. I think I've worn it in like 3 out of my 4 recent videos, and I just think it's a really fun, berry toned palette. The shadows are really rich, so blendable, and just easy to work with, but there is quite a bit of fallout, so just keep that in mind. Brown Sugar is a really pretty neutral palette. This one is a little bit darker than Going Coconuts, so that's going to be a great option if you have a darker skin tone or if you like something a little bit more smoky. I don't know if this palette is still available. It's been a while since I've checked the ColourPop website to see what they have, but the Soul palette is a very bright, warm-toned palette, and then the Mar palette has some warm tones as well, but a couple of pops of blue. So these are nice if you like a little bit more variety, but overall you do like a very warm toned palette. And then moving into some more 9 pans, these are all of the ones that come in cardboard packaging. So I have the Baroque palette, which I love because it's very smoky, very gray toned. It's definitely different than a lot of their other palettes. So I do enjoy using this one when I want more of a dramatic look. They did a collection with 3 different palettes, and I actually haven't tried these next 2. I don't have a lot of palettes in my collection that I haven't tried because typically I don't put products into my makeup collection until I use them, but I know that I want to use these. I did get them in the mail as PR, and I just didn't have a chance to try them out yet, but I like that they're a little bit more smoky than some of their other makeup releases, and if they're anything like the Baroque palette, I know that I'll really enjoy the quality. But if you're looking for a little bit more of a rich, smoky palette from ColourPop, then these might be a good option for you. A lot of their palettes do lean a little bit more subtle, so these are a nice alternative. The Making Mauves palette is a great option if you like lighter pinks and purples. The 3 shimmers in the middle are so interesting. They're different than a lot of ColourPop's other shimmers. They have a little bit of texture to them, so they look really pretty on the eyes. I totally forgot to include the She's Got Solstice palette in my 2020 ranking. I don't know how, but I think it's because I got it back before March, so it must have completely slipped my mind, but I do enjoy this one. It's just like a basic neutral palette with a few pops of color. The Child palette is a super cute option if you do like greens, and I think I like this one better than Mint to Be and Just My Luck, just because these greens are what I would consider to be a little bit more wearable. You also get 2 browns and then kind of a golden shade, which is nice as well, and the quality is really great. This one is a little bit newer to my collection. It is the Lil Ray of Sunshine palette. I got it as part of a holiday vault, and it is a yellow toned palette, but you do get some neutrals as well. I think this was actually their first all matte 9-pan palette. So if you like matte shadows, you'll enjoy this one because they are very, very blendable. The Big Poppy palette is actually also an all matte palette. I also got this one as part of a holiday vault collection, so it's a little bit newer to my collection. I like this one better than the orange monochromatic palette because I feel like these orange shadows are a little bit less intimidating. They kind of lean slightly brown, so I do enjoy using this one. Blush Crush is a really pretty light pink toned palette. This was one of my favorites during the spring season. I actually ranked it pretty high in my 2020 ranking video. It's just an easy palette to work with. The shadows are very blendable, very smooth. It's not anything groundbreaking, but if you tend to wear lighter pinks, then you'll really enjoy this one. I just realized I totally forgot to include Nude Mood in my 2020 ranking as well, so I did miss a couple of palettes, but this was new to my collection this year. It's just a simple neutral palette, but if that's what you wear on an everyday basis, you'll really enjoy it. I find myself reaching for it quite a bit. I like ColourPop's neutrals because their formula is just very simple, very blendable, really easy to work with. So whenever I want to do more of a neutral look, something quick and easy, their formula and their palettes are perfect. That's Taupe is definitely one of my favorites because it leans a little bit cooler toned, but you also get some rosy shades in there as well. And again, I mean, it might come off as boring if you tend to prefer something a little bit more intense, but I love using this one. Now, if you like a little bit of a larger palette, you might enjoy the Bare Necessities palette. They also have a cooler toned version called Stone Cold Fox, but this one comes with quite a few warm toned eyeshadows, and it really has everything that you would need. So if you're not a fan of like the smaller 9-pans, you might enjoy this larger option. Even though it is a larger palette, it's not unnecessarily big. It's pretty thin overall, and it's easy to store and easy to hold when you're doing your makeup. So Jaded is a fun option if you like colorful eyeshadow. There are a ton of jewel tones in here and then some brighter shades as well. And typically if I do want a colorful look but I want something a little bit more smoky, I enjoy reaching for this one. I actually just have a bunch of ColourPop singles. These are pretty old. ColourPop used to be really big on single shadows back before they started doing their palettes, and that's when I accumulated quite a few of these. I still reach for them, especially this palette because it has a bunch of neutrals, so I'll usually reach into this when I'm doing a look and the palette doesn't have a color that I want. So I just have a couple of their empty palettes and I kind of reorganized them at the beginning of last year. This one just has some of my pinks and berries, and I do enjoy using them. I'm not like a big single eyeshadow fan, but as far as singles go, I do like this formula, so I do keep them in my collection. And then I just have two older palettes. The Fame palette was like the first cool toned palette that they did back in the day before cool tones kind of became trendy again. So I don't know if it was ever really that successful, but I still enjoy using it. It was definitely one of my favorites when they did release it. Through My Eyes was a collaboration palette, and I thought that this one was so interesting because you really get a mix of shadows. You have some colorful shades, some neutrals, and again, it's just kind of a little bit different than a lot of their other palettes they have in their collection. So I do still keep this one because I like to reach into it, especially for like a green or berry toned look. I have a few palettes from Dominique Cosmetics, including the Celestial Thunder palette. I think I got this one in a BoxyCharm. It's a mini version of their Celestial Storm palette, so it is missing 4 of the shades in the original palette, but I really like the shades they chose for this one because they just work really well together. They're different, they're bright, and the formula is really good. I also have the Latte 2 palette by Dominique Cosmetics, which is more of a neutral palette, and then there are like a few pops of color. This isn't my favorite palette that they've done. I don't reach for the shades on the right, and then a few of the neutrals are a little bit more difficult to blend out. So as far as neutral palettes go, I definitely have other ones that I prefer over this one. I would say the Berries and Cream palette is my favorite palette from the brand. This was actually the first one that I tried. I was just really impressed by it because a lot of the shades in here are shades that are sometimes patchy in other palettes, but they did a really good job with the formula in this one because everything blends out so well, so easily. Now that I'm looking at it, I need to pull it back out and put it in my everyday makeup drawer because I just enjoy using it. This is an older one, but I do have the Urban Decay Born to Run palette, which I think was one of their best palettes. I feel like this one is generally really well loved, and I think a lot of people do own this one. You get quite a few shades in here, and it was just something different from Urban Decay, so I do enjoy using this one. I do have the Tati Beauty Textured Neutrals Volume 1. I was hoping we were going to see more versions of this palette in 2020, but we did not. I still enjoy this one. I haven't reached for it in a little while, so again, I need to put this one in my everyday makeup drawer. I especially love wearing those berry tones. I'm someone who loves doing a very simple monochromatic eyeshadow look, so the layout of this palette really speaks to me. And then I do have the Profusion Mirage palette. If you guys haven't tried Profusion eyeshadows, they're really good. They're very, very affordable. They tend to do larger palettes, which I don't typically go for, but they do have some smaller palettes on their website as well. And they're definitely affordable, they're blendable, and they are such a nice option if you're looking for something a little bit less expensive than even some of the other drugstore palettes. I actually got this palette in a BoxyCharm and I decided to try it out. Sometimes I get new brands in BoxyCharm that I really fall in love with, and I love the color story in this palette, and the metallics look really good on the eyes. I haven't used a ton of the matte shadows, but when I do use them, they perform well. I think I also got this one in a BoxyCharm or maybe a FabFitFun box. It is the Beauty Bakerie Breakfast in Bed palette. The reason why I didn't feature this one in my ranking is because I only used it once. I really like the color story, but I feel like the shadows were maybe a little bit lackluster, so I need to try it out a little bit more before I officially share my thoughts on my channel, but I do love the colors they chose for this one. I do have a bunch of Juvia's Place palettes, so the Masquerade is one of my favorites. I love this one because it's half neutral, half colorful, so you can really do anything with this. If you are new to color and you're intimidated by it, this is a great option because you can do a mainly neutral look and then pull in one of the colorful shades on the lower lash line or all over the lid. The Magic palette is great because it has a little bit of everything. I love using it as an accent palette, so I'll usually complete or start my look with another palette and then pull in one of these shades to complete it. I love the bottom 2 rows. Those are my favorite. If you guys haven't tried Juvia's Place, their shadows are super intense and vibrant, and they are really, really rich. The Warrior palette is a great option if you like more of a neutral palette. It's very bronzy. There are some gold shadows, or I guess one gold shadow, and I love how intense and rich these are. It is a Black-owned beauty brand, so the shadows are going to work amazing for you no matter what your skin tone is. If you're looking for a different palette that's a little bit more unique, the Tribe palette is a great option. There are some duochromes in here, and I think the color story is just different. It's unique. It's not like anything that I own in my collection, but it is a lot of fun to use. My first Juvia's Place palette is the Nubian palette. This one is pretty old. I'll probably have to declutter it at some point, but I still like using this one when I want a very simple, warm-toned, neutral look. Typically with this palette, I'll take a matte shadow and place it in the crease, and then I'll take any shimmer shadow and place it all over the lid, and I have a look in 2 minutes. So Juvia's Place did some mini palettes this year. This one is the Taupes, and I feel like the formula is different. They're not quite as vibrant as their other palettes, and I've heard that's the same case with a few of the other minis. So I don't know if they changed the formula permanently or they just switched it up for these minis, but if you are a fan of their original formula, I would stick with the larger palettes, and the minis are a little bit better if you like something maybe just lighter and softer. I have one more Profusion palette. This one is the Nude Eyes palette, and I love how this performs. It's so easy to work with, and again, I just like Profusion as a brand. I definitely want to try out more of their products in 2021. I have a few Urban Decay Naked palettes, so the Naked Honey is probably my favorite. I just love this color story. I think it's such a pretty, flattering color story for so many skin tones. You can get a neutral look, but I feel like it's a little bit more updated and more fun. I love the fact that there are some golden shades right in the center. I just did a get ready with me using this. I'll link it below if you guys want to check it out. I also have a video on the Urban Decay Naked Ultraviolet. I feel like this got some mixed reviews, and I love it. I think it's one of the best palettes they've done. It's such a good option if purple eyeshadow typically intimidates you, because these purples are easy to work with, and they look great mixed with the warm tones or on their own, and I just have a lot of fun when I use this one. The Urban Decay Naked Heat is one of my favorites because typically when it comes to orangey red eyeshadows, I'm kind of intimidated by them, but this just makes it very easy to use them. These shadows are not overly pigmented or too intense, but they're also very, very blendable and easy to work with, so I do enjoy this one. And then the Urban Decay Naked Cherry is a great option if you do like those berry tones. I think that this is one of their best palettes in terms of color story because you can do something a little bit lighter and softer or something a little bit more smoky and intense, and all of the shadows just coordinate so well together. The Dose of Colors Friendcation palette has some of the best shimmers that I've ever tried. It's such a unique, interesting formula. It's almost like they have a little bit of texture to them, so they just look really pretty on the eyes. They catch the light in such a nice way, and it's just a very simple palette, but I love using this one. I do have a few Anastasia palettes, so of course I have the Modern Renaissance palette, which at this point I feel like this one is getting a little bit old, but it still seems to work well. I wouldn't say that this is my favorite Anastasia palette, but it's the first one that I tried, so I feel like I just have like very good memories of it. I really like the Norvina palette. I know that this one isn't a favorite for a lot of people, but I do love pinks and purples, and I think this makes pink and purple just very approachable, very fun, easy to wear. Typically, I get more of like a soft pastel look when I use it, and I just think it's really pretty. The best Anastasia palette that I ever tried was definitely the Jackie Aina palette. This one is so rich and intense, but it's so blendable. Typically with shadows like that purple and even that dark brown, sometimes they're a little bit more difficult to work with and blend out on the eyes. That is not the case with this one, but they're so vibrant at the same time. I don't know what they did, but the formula really is like a step above their other palettes. I like the Soft Glam palette when I want to do a little bit more of a warm toned look. For some reason, this always reminds me of the summertime, and I always pull it back out during the summer just for like very simple, easy, mainly like brown, smoky eyeshadow looks. They did bring back the Sultry palette this holiday season, so if you guys tried it for the first time, I would love to know what you guys think. I like this palette. When they first released it, I told myself I wasn't going to buy it, but I'm glad that I did because it's just very blendable, and whenever I want to do any sort of like special occasion look, which doesn't happen very often these days, but whenever I want to do like a smoky look for like a wedding or a party, which again hasn't happened in a while, this is my go-to palette. The Too Faced Gingerbread Spice palette is a fun, colorful option. I'm going to be completely honest and say that I don't think I used it at all in 2020, So when I do my declutter this year, I'll probably pass this one along, but I think it's cute. It was a fun purchase and I did use it when I first got it. It's just one of those palettes that kind of got pushed to the back of my drawer, unfortunately. And again, when I do my declutter, which maybe I should have just sat down and did my declutter, I will get rid of this one because it is time for it to go. I love the Sweet Peach palette. I used it so much when I first got it, but the shadows are getting old and they just don't perform like they used to. The Too Faced Chocolate Gold is one of the best palettes that Too Faced has done because it has such a nice metallic formula. It's very rich, very easy to work with. Typically, I'll just use my finger to apply the shadows all over the lid, and then you get a couple of matte shadows if you want to kind of do a very simple look for the base and then go in with one of the metallics. This one is perfect. It is usually on sale during like Ulta's 21 Days of Beauty, so you can still get it, but you can usually get it for a discounted price. This is the Tiny Marvels palette. It was a collaboration between Mel Thompson and Sydney Grace, and I had never tried Sydney Grace eyeshadows, but I think that they are so good. Mel did an amazing job with the color story. It's so much fun, and you can do so many different looks with this one palette. I love the greens, I love the pinks. It really is just such a fun palette to use, and the quality is so good. So I do want to try more from Sydney Grace at some point. This Tarte palette is pretty old. I am blanking on the name for some reason. Oh, it's the Clay Play Face Shaping Palette. I think that's what it's called. It's just a very simple, toned down, neutral matte palette with a few shadows or a few products you can use as bronzers or contour shades as well. I did try the KKW Beauty Classic Blossom palette in 2020, and I really liked this palette. I still like it. I just think it's such a pretty color story. The shadows all fade into each other really nicely, and if you like berry tones, this palette is really easy to work with. They're very blendable, they're not patchy, they're easy to build up, and I just really enjoy it. The Too Faced Born This Way Natural Nudes palette is probably one of my favorite Too Faced palettes. It looks pretty simple, but I think that's why I like it. You can just do a very basic neutral look, but the shimmers look really pretty on the eyes. They have a little bit of texture to them, so they're not necessarily like the smoothest shimmers, but that's why I really like them. I just think they look kind of glittery, but you're just using a shimmer shadow. I do have a few palettes from Kaleidos. They make really, really pretty 6-pan palettes, and I think they have some larger palettes as well, but their shadows are really rich, really interesting. I love their color stories, and I think that they make really fun products. I also have a few Melt Cosmetics palettes. So I do have the Muerte palette, which is just such a fun color story. I'll be honest and say I don't reach for this one as much as I originally thought I would, but if I do want a green or blue or red look, this one is a lot of fun. And I need to pull it out, put it in my everyday makeup drawer and get some use out of it because I've kind of been playing with color a little bit more than normal lately. So I think that this would be a really fun one to use again. This past year, I did purchase the Smoke Sessions palette, which I do love. I like that you can do just a bunch of different green looks. So you can do more of like a golden green, a little bit more of a minty green, or something in between. And I like that it has so many pretty shimmers because shimmers are my favorite. So it really is a lot of fun to play with. I think my favorite melt palette that I've tried is the She's and Parties palette. This one is a purple themed palette and I just love purples. The matte shadows in here are so blendable. And again, sometimes purples can be very patchy, hard to work with. That is not the case with this one. If you like purple shadow, I think you'll enjoy this one. It doesn't have a lot of super intense metallics or shimmers, but the matte shadows and the satins are really, really nice. This was one of my favorite ColourPop palettes. They did discontinue it a while ago. It was the Bretman Rock collab, and he did 2 palettes. This one is the Wet palette, which is a little bit more blue toned. And then he also did this one, which is the Lip palette, which is a little bit more red toned. I still keep them in my collection, even though I do feel like I kind of have similar colors within other palettes, because I think they just perform well. They're really blendable, easy to work with, and I do still use them from time to time. I have one Violet Voss palette. I think I got this one in a BoxyCharm, and it's nice. I haven't tried a lot from Violet Voss, and I don't know why, because they do have a lot of really pretty palettes, and their formula is really good. I think that it's just a brand that I tend to skip over for some reason, but I do enjoy using this one. It performs really nicely. And then finishing up, I just have some of the e.l.f. bite-sized eyeshadow palettes. I am so glad they released these at the beginning of 2020 because I think they perform so nicely. I love the metallics, I love the mattes. I will say that there are maybe 1 or 2 that aren't as good as some of the other ones that I've tried, but overall I'm pretty impressed by the quality and they're $3 each. And that brings me to the end of the video. Those are all of the eyeshadow palettes that I have in my collection. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. I know that I have quite a few palettes, but eyeshadow palettes are my favorite. I love trying them. I love reviewing them. And I just think there are so many fun formulas out there. So let me know in the comment section below which palettes you guys have in your collection. Is it small? Is it big? Which one is your favorite? I would love to hear from you because I could talk about eyeshadow palettes all day long. But I would love for you guys to subscribe. I upload a lot of eyeshadow palette related videos, and I would love to have you here on my channel. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys very soon with a new video. Bye.